Kristen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I've loved the fact that we've had a chance to develop a relationship, and I've gotten to know you and Bindu and everything you all are doing, and super excited to talk with you today. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you so much for having us. Really love the opportunity to talk about our startup. So.
Absolutely. So just, I guess, at high level, tell us a little bit about you and your background. What were you doing before? What kind of led you into the startup world and now becoming a startup founder?
Man, there's so many ways we could take this. So I'll try to keep it to like maybe the most recent decade. But essentially, I've always had a heart for groups that I think are disadvantaged, need more support, and especially women's issues, children's issues as well. So right after college, I did a program called Teach for America, taught in an interstate school, and it really fascinated me. I think that was my first exposure to social determinants of health, which is something we kind of talk about in healthcare, which is anything other than healthcare that impacts your health. So it was an amazing 2-year experience. And then from there, I went and worked for Autism Speaks, and I was the youngest member of the senior leadership team there, and was running their national strategic partners group. But after doing nonprofit for a really long time, it was absolutely amazing. But I wanted a new challenge, and I found that challenge in healthcare. So I moved into the healthcare technology side of things, started leading different sales teams, selling into every channel globally, and really just learned so much. I feel like after being in healthcare for about 5 years, I was still a newbie. So it was just an incredible place to feel like you're still making a difference for patients and the different needs that they have, but also just such a beautiful landscape with technology and all the different ways we can commercialize there. But after, being in my mid-30s, I realized I wanted another new challenge, and grad school was that challenge. So I went back to MIT Sloan for an executive MBA, and it's just an amazing intersection of healthcare and technology. And while there, my best friend let me know that she had postpartum depression, and was really devastated by the way that it kind of snuck up on all of us. She wasn't really sharing much about it with like her spouse and her friends like me. And then even her doctor tried to screen her, and she actually lied to her doctor because she thought that there would be consequences of potentially her child being taken away. So I was really, curious about this. I wanted to know if more women were going through this. And we started doing research at MIT, and next thing you know, winning competitions on campus and getting into MIT's accelerator called Delta V. And we've been working on this problem ever since. And it's been an amazing journey. So I think that's kind of the highlights of, why do I care about a problem like this? And just, it's definitely personal. And also with my co-founder. So I met my co-founder Bindu at MIT, and she had a personal experience with postpartum depression while she was leading engineering teams at Intermountain Health. So it's been a wonderful way for us to team up. We're joined by so many other people who are just making Nurtur happen. But yeah, we really care. We've experienced this ourselves.
Can you tell me a little bit more about postpartum depression itself? What exactly is it? What is it we know about postpartum depression currently within the healthcare community?
Yeah, and I love talking about this because postpartum depression goes by quite a few different names, if you will. So there's something called perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. It's kind of a umbrella term for a lot of different mental challenges that start and end during pregnancy and postpartum. So everything from anxiety, OCD, postpartum depression, et cetera. A lot of these things can impact women. And actually 1 in 5 of them will have postpartum depression. So 20% of everyone who gives birth, and giving birth is the number one cause of hospitalization in this country. And postpartum depression is the number one outcome of that experience. So it was really shocking to me to learn that 85% of patients are currently untreated. They're going undiagnosed and then unable to access care on the other end of that as well. So that's where we sort of started. We're like, if the standard of care is letting so many patients fall through the cracks, we probably have an opportunity here to do something completely different and just shake up the status quo.
So 1 in 5 that we know of that are diagnosed, but 85% go undiagnosed, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, so the majority of those that meet the criteria for postpartum depression are just simply undiagnosed and untreated.
How does that happen within our healthcare system today? You would think we're so much more sophisticated and advanced in, our ability to diagnose these things, preventative medicine, getting in front of these types of issues. And if it's something that's so prevalent, how is it even possible that 85% can go undiagnosed?
It is so interesting. And so the doctor that's most prepared and potentially could make an impact is the OBGYN. She meets with patients about 10 to 12 times during pregnancy. But unfortunately, these doctors are not necessarily mental health experts, right? I mean, they go through so many years of schooling to have you safely progress through a pregnancy, to give birth. They're basically surgeons as well, so a very complicated type of clinician. But they don't have this expertise. And unfortunately, a lot of women, they're not being screened just because of these really short appointment windows we have. An OB will have approximately 7 to 15 minutes to cover everything about essentially the health for a mother and an infant. So this mother-child dyad that we have during pregnancy, and mental health is just falling through the cracks. And another interesting component, so postpartum depression is most commonly screened at the postpartum checkup. So that 6-week appointment you have after giving birth, where the doctor's really concerned about your body, making sure you're progressing healthily, but also going to hopefully screen you in many cases. So what percentage of women do you think go to this postpartum checkup?
I would hope nearly 100%, but I know that that's not the answer.
Yeah. So shockingly, 40% of women are actually missing this checkup that's all about them
Wow.
and their health, and could be the potential place where they would finally get screened for this and be able to receive help. But unfortunately, you can't screen someone who's not showing up. So a lot of different reasons baked into why women are kind of falling through the cracks, but that's the majority of the reasons why they're not getting necessarily the treatment on the OB side of things. And then you look at what my friend went through personally, and if it's your very first child, now after you give birth, you start working with a pediatrician. And so the pediatrician, you go in, you start, really the appointment's about the baby, but there's also the hope that the pediatrician is going to screen. And so many times they do screen the mother for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. But unfortunately, just like my friend did, the trust levels are completely different because this may be the first time they're working with a pediatrician. And so their ability to want to disclose a potential challenge just goes down. And like my friend did, she was worried that something would happen to her child if she disclosed. And so all this to say, we realize by the time symptoms arise, it's too late. It's really too late to help you. And we wanted to get ahead of that.
Are there any differences, or is there any distinction between postpartum depression and, I guess, just normal clinical depression diagnoses?
Yeah, no, I love this question because there's so many things baked into this. So postpartum depression, there's a few different pathways happening. So we have sort of the body and the hormonal changes and some of the trauma that you can go through giving birth. So that has a huge potential impact in the type of depression that you're having. But the other half of the impact is actually a lifestyle change. So basically overnight you go to having a brand new infant, 24/7, lactation, feedings, changing, getting no sleep, and very isolated. So it's really hard to see friends and have that support right now. So there's really these two very interesting components where some of the sort of hormonal pathways and like that physical pathway may be treated more with like a medication component or pharmaceutical intervention. But there's actually really cool interventions you can do to help someone overcome some of the lifestyle challenges as well that we eventually started incorporating into Nurtur.
Interesting. Okay. And I guess ideally we would like to get as far ahead of this as possible, but even just from my own understanding and having family members, who have had mental health challenges and things of that sort, oftentimes it's very hard to know that somebody is, I guess, on a path towards that like clinical diagnosis until we see the symptoms manifest. So I guess what makes it so challenging outside of obviously the disclosure part, but if, for example, there are these, likely hormonal changes to take place that, have pharmaceutical interventions, and if there are these known lifestyle changes, right, that almost every mother and family is going to go through as a result of being, a new parent. How is it that there isn't more of a, I think, comprehensive approach and plan for a preventative solution to prevent postpartum depression afterwards, since it seems like this is something that's fairly common, at least the conditions are fairly common, such that we should be able to have some sort of predictive, preventative way to get ahead of this?
Yeah, so there's like so many cool applications of AI in healthcare, right? And we're coming up on 5 or 10 years since a lot of these have been incorporated. And one of the most interesting things about postpartum depression, the way the onset happens during pregnancy or postpartum and, tends to end about 12 months postpartum, it's a very homogenous form of depression, which makes it ideally suited for machine learning for prediction around this. But we were shocked when we were looking at this problem that no one was doing it here in the United States. And you can say a lot of different things about this problem. It's everything from the data sets here are pretty paltry compared to other countries, to also women's health, unfortunately, not receiving adequate funding and interest until recently. So there's this huge opportunity with all the tailwinds coming together now for us to finally apply these prediction capabilities here. But it is a really unique kind of mental health challenge. There's another unfortunate truth, though, is that major depressive disorder, while very distinct from postpartum depression, untreated postpartum depression can actually turn into lifelong major depressive disorder. So there's a lot of unfortunate continuity there.
Yeah, and then just to take a step back, when you said a homogeneous form of depression, what did you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so like the criteria that kind of allow someone to diagnose you with postpartum depression are kind of the onset in terms of timing, and then finally just the symptoms of sort of extreme sadness and unhappiness. They're all very homogenous, whereas major depressive disorder, sort of that generalized depression, can do so many, there's some situational stuff. The way that the symptoms can appear with each patient can be very different. And then also the timeline. It could be a lifetime or it could be very short term. So it's that's where prediction has not quite caught up to major depressive disorder in general, more heterogeneous.
At what point do you think someone becomes more at risk of developing postpartum depression? Is it something that happens in the first trimester, or is it something that doesn't happen until the actual birth in the postpartum period after that?
This is such a great question. So postpartum depression, it's kind of what we call this colloquially, but it's better known as perinatal depression, which basically means the onset can be during pregnancy or postpartum. So unfortunately, many people are blindsided when they experience it in the first, second, or third trimester. And 57% of all cases actually happen during pregnancy, which is why it's really critical that we screen during pregnancy, which is unfortunately not necessarily always the case. So many women, I think, especially if you've had a past history of mental health challenges, you should really look to get screened and to stay on top of your mental health during pregnancy. I'd have to look into like the particular trimesters. I want to say probably the first trimester is the most likely, but maybe just don't quote me on it.
No, yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
No worries at all. Okay, great. And then I guess when we talk about the factors, right, and screening, things of that sort. So as of today or historical, right, let's say last 5 years or so, how is the industry or healthcare professionals approaching this problem through screening? For example, what happens in the screening? What are they looking for?
Yeah.
What are these key indicators that can potentially raise a flag and say, hey, we need to provide additional care to this patient?
Yeah. So today, if you're going to be screened, the standard of care is basically to ask you 8 to 10 questions about your current levels of your mental health today. And some of the limitations of that are, we're only catching a snapshot, a moment in time. So if you have depression today, we may catch it. But if you're going to have depression in the future, we're not getting any awareness of that. And secondly, just like my friend illustrated, a lot of people, unfortunately, will lie or mislead or choose the correct answer in order to not trigger any support because they're afraid of consequences. And unfortunately, once you have depression, you can't really understand that people just want to help you.
How do you think we can overcome the human factor to get to the point where patients, 85%, right? Some of those individuals will allow the healthcare professionals to get the information they need to be able to treat them effectively to help improve their outcomes and the quality of their life, essentially.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many factors at play here. One thing I find really interesting, let's say you even do leave behind the stigma and you raise your hand for help. Unfortunately, there's a shortage of behavioral health clinicians. And so your ability to immediately get that help the moment you need it is reduced because you're probably going to be put on a wait list. And when we talk to different OBGYNs who are screening, we're trying to catch these cases, they tell us they dread seeing these scores, these high scores on the screeners because they don't have a direct referral pathway or a place to send them for help right away.
What's the average time that it would take currently for someone to receive care if they were to be flagged on these screenings?
Yeah, so the majority of Americans live in a behavioral health care zone where there's not enough behavioral health care, sort of behavioral health clinicians. And so unfortunately, most are going to find themselves with some kind of wait list. I've seen everything from no clinicians calling someone back whatsoever. So if you
Wow.
get a list of 10 psychiatrists or psychologists, unfortunately, they all have wait lists and you can't even get someone to call you back. And I've heard up to 12 months as well. So there's some really tragic things that have happened. Being from the Boston area, we lost some lives to women who tried to get help. And unfortunately, they were put on a wait list and there just wasn't help the minute they needed it, which is why I'm always haunted by that. And I think by the time symptoms arise, it's really too late in my mind. And what you were asking earlier kind of had to do with how can we have people feel more comfort and be more bought into the process. And when I think about how we could work with someone before they had symptoms, because it's so clear and so easy to predict who these people might be, and we can have them opt in and create their ideal care plan at the earliest stages so that when they do eventually have symptoms, A, the wait lists are already mitigated, and B, they feel more confident going into this. And then finally, we actually find there's a small protective factor. So when people do consider risk and then have these conversations with doctors at the earliest stages of pregnancy, the risk for then having postpartum depression actually goes down.
That's really helpful information. I'm amazed by the fact that someone could seek help, right? Because it's already hard enough to disclose. Mm-hmm. Somebody discloses, they go through the screening, they get flagged as someone who needs care or assistance. And then the wait time it takes for them to receive care can actually prove to be fatal in some cases.
Yeah.
That is incredible to me, and extremely tragic, right? Obviously, everyone is doing the best that they can given the system constraints and the circumstances. And but obviously there needs to be solutions in this area because it doesn't seem like this is something that should be allowed to persist, right? Given that people have awareness of it now, and people like yourself and Bindu and other founders are here to solve problems in this regard, right? So, yeah, wow.
And yeah, I mean, it's shocking, but maternal mortality rates are higher than they've ever been in this country, only getting worse. And unfortunately, mental health is now the leading cause of death for moms after they leave the hospital.
Wow. Do you have any statistics on how many deaths?
It's unfortunate. It's around 900, between 900 to 1,000 each year. And so mental health being this interesting category that encompasses about half substance abuse and unfortunately half like suicide and postpartum depression cases.
I see. Okay. Yeah. And then I also have another question as well. I'm just, diving a little bit deeper into the current state of things. Number one, is there any difference in the risk profile between first-time mothers and, second, third child down the line? Or is there just kind of a constant likelihood or probability that somebody, given a particular set of circumstances, would be more likely to develop, postpartum depression?
Yeah, I can't say that the science has caught up to that because in the US, we don't have the greatest data sets. So there's one incredible data set, but it was focused on sort of first-time pregnancies. And so now we don't even have comparisons, first, second, third, et cetera. But I can share anecdotally, some of the worst cases of postpartum depression are actually the second or third pregnancy because you think you've gone through this before, you think you know what's coming, and then you're totally blindsided by again, that shift in sort of your body hormone and chemistry, and then also the lifestyle change of bringing that final child home.
That's really interesting. And it seems to make sense to me, just because I would imagine all of the factors and conditions from the first pregnancy remaining constant. You add an additional newborn or a child, depending on how close the children are in age, into that as well. Seems like it would only increase stress more than likely, assuming everything stays the same level of support and, family, factors, socioeconomic factors, things of that sort. That seems to make sense anecdotally, even though there's no data on it at this time.
Well, and we kind of touched on like social determinants of health earlier. So there's so many interesting things baked into postpartum depression and this perinatal sort of stage where First of all, you're getting a 2-for-1. You get the dyad of the mother and child. And then secondly, the family dynamics. Like you said, you touched on other potential children in play, but also the spouse, generally the father. So in many cases, 1 in 5 women will have postpartum depression, but it's lesser known that actually 1 in 10 men will have postpartum depression. And to me, that really illustrates the interesting sort of pathways. Like we said, there's a very physical pathway, especially with the woman, but the lifestyle change and how that impacts the man and bringing forward his potential postpartum depression as well.
Wow, that's extremely interesting, and it's funny because I wondered that earlier when you were sharing some of the information about the 1 in 5 women and 85%, because obviously as a man we're not necessarily the best when it comes to being vulnerable and sharing emotions, and obviously in that situation you want to remain strong, or at least appear strong, appear to be in control of the situation, especially, for example, if my wife or my partner is having a mental health issue or crises at the time. But I was curious if it affected the men as well. And 1 in 10, that's significant.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because these are kind of like separate numbers, 1 in 5, 1 in 10. But when you cross-reference them, what you actually find is the correlation and the number for men actually goes up. So if she has postpartum depression, his odds of having postpartum depression increase.
And is there any, I guess, current pathway or I guess, is there any current thinking or approach around going through the husband to improve the quality of care for the wife who is suffering from these symptoms?
Huge area of opportunity, but in some ways I actually feel for the male spouse in this case even more, because at least from a woman's standpoint, she has a touch point with her OB, and then depending on who does the care for the child, generally tends to be the female partner more often. She has that touch point to the pediatrician. But men, if they are having postpartum depression, aren't necessarily going to their doctors in this sort of birth touch point. And so I think they fall through the cracks much more.
As someone who is hoping to be a father soon, definitely something I want to be mindful of.
Yeah.
So, okay, in terms of, I guess, the current state of things, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a very significant portion of mothers end up diagnosed with postpartum depression, but an even larger number go undiagnosed. There are a lot of challenges related to this, one of which, the one that stands out to me the most, is just the fear around the disclosure of these symptoms, because they don't want to lose their child, some, other factors involved there, but mostly, obviously, issues around disclosure for that population. And so when we look at areas and opportunities for solutions to neutralize these issues where they are, to then help improve the lives and outcomes of these women or, patients, because now it's fathers as well. Yeah. Where are the opportunities that you see from your seat?
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, super interesting that machine learning can predict postpartum depression with really high accuracy. And this has to do with the homogeneous nature of this kind of depression. And so we tagged on that right away, and we realized that no one was doing this in the US. So we went out and we spoke with every single researcher that we could find in the space, mostly in Europe, but eventually found someone here in the US, Dr. Martin Frosch. And we spoke with him, and next thing you know, he came on board as our chief science officer. And so what we've done now is we have a proprietary machine learning algorithm that can predict postpartum depression with near perfect accuracy. Yeah. But the other thing you have to figure out is, do women want this? And it's really interesting because women are very distracted during pregnancy. They are pulled in a lot of different ways. They're very hopeful about lots of amazing and positive outcomes. And so the space that they have to kind of hold for negative outcomes, especially around themselves, being kind of self-oriented at this time, really goes down. So what we found is OBGYNs are the perfect person who's really aligned to catch this early, but they just lack the right tools. And so they get really excited about the machine learning element. And it's really easy to deploy in terms of just looking like a traditional screener. So asking 8 different questions or pulling these data points from an electronic medical record basically gives us this data at the earliest stages of pregnancy before there's any symptoms whatsoever.
I guess I have a lot of questions, especially around the predictive nature of this. And how early you're able to predict things. So, and forgive me, I'm not sure if you mentioned an exact point is at which you're able to predict someone is, more than likely going to, develop postpartum depression, but how early is that
Yeah.
for you and your model?
So I want to talk about like the strategy we put into the algorithm actually. And this
Okay.
is a beautiful way to do it because there's a lot of things that are predictive. And so if you just feed 1,000 different data points into a machine learning algorithm, it'll spit out whatever works for it, right? Whatever's the most predictive. But you have to really narrow your focus. And so what we realized is predicting is only useful if we pair it with a preventative intervention or if we pair it with some kind of intervention that takes advantage of a large window where we can intervene. And so we restricted the machine learning algorithm to only pre-pregnancy variables so that technically before you're even pregnant, we could tell you your risk or essentially at that first intake appointment with an OB around weeks 7 to 12.
Okay, so then that would then mean, at least the way I'm understanding that, very limited in terms of biological factors. As in regards to the machine learning model, this will have to be things that are probably socioeconomic, family dynamics, conditions surrounding their lifestyle, things of that sort, as opposed to more of a biological determinant of this particular mental health issue.
Yeah, there's so many things baked into that. So first of all, you're totally spot on. There's some really interesting factors that sort of are correlated with postpartum depression. So we're going into pregnancy older, sicker, and more isolated than ever before. So unsurprisingly, these factors are baked into our algorithm. But also a really predictive factor is your past mental health experience and how you treated that. So these factors all together are baked into that machine learning algorithm, currently a 0.98 AUC, which is 1.0 is perfect accuracy. So very, very accurate.
So just taking a quick step back into the risk factors in the current state of things. Is there any data around, age, where are younger pregnancies, less likely and older pregnancies more likely, or is there any sort of correlation with age in terms of the risk for someone to develop postpartum depression?
Yeah, I love this question because there's a few factors we've identified that we call like a U factor. So basically it's a U curve where being on the front end, being a super young mom, especially teenage pregnancy, highly predictive that you'll have postpartum depression. And then your risk goes down until you get into your early to late 30s. And then risk goes up extremely high again. And so super interesting how a couple of these variables, it's being both young or older, and similar things with education as well.
Wow. Is there anything that stands out or any data on, some of the factors correlated with that?
I would
What's
say
common between the younger and the older? I'm sorry.
No worries. I think one thing that's super interesting about machine learning is it can give you an outcome, but it can't necessarily tell you why it came up with that as a prediction element. But we can ascribe certain importance to things. So what we know with like our youngest potential pregnant, teens or very early 20s is your social network is not necessarily adapted to support you as much as others. So if you are having babies at the same time as your best friends and your peers, that support and less isolation kind of is at play. But also just, perhaps life outcomes or partner support, not really as strong at a super young age.
I guess now going back to the actual model itself, you've talked about the model at a high level. Obviously, we don't want to get too deep into proprietary or anything like that. I guess my question and where I would see maybe a potential challenge to the solution. And would love to know the challenges and risk you see, moving forward in your own solution, because I think that that's really interesting as well. But depending on how early you do this, as you mentioned, with a mother who is extremely happy about being pregnant, they're feeling the love, everybody's excited, taking time away to then pull them to the side and say, hey, this is an intervention because you're going to have postpartum depression once you birth your baby. Is there any concern around, for lack of better words, projecting the condition onto someone in the sense that kind of getting into their psyche, their psychology, speaking from a position of authority through the OBGYN, saying, hey, this is an authoritative figure, my physician. They're telling me I am going to have postpartum depression when I feel great. I'm enjoying pregnancy right now. Is there any concern about the impact that could have on the patient, given that, again, it's kind of a shock because I'm not feeling anything, but then you're telling me I'm now going to start feeling things and I'm going to develop this mental health issue moving forward?
Yeah, and I love this concern because I think it illustrates like how much care we think for the patient, like, should we be blind in some way, et cetera. But one of the most fascinating effects of our machine learning algorithm, we've identified a lot of predictive variables. And most of the time, these variables, if you say yes to this question, it means you're more likely to have postpartum depression. But there's one variable in particular that actually has a protective or preventative effect. And that is having a discussion with your doctor about mental health challenges during pregnancy. So ironically, actually learning about your risk or talking about this with your doctor may actually protect you in the long run. And it's something that we're very excited about.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. I guess, do you feel like a significant portion of that 85%, because that's the ones who I'm kind of thinking about, right? Like the ones who are already, the patients who are already going through the screening, disclosing, they're actively engaged in their own health outcomes. They don't have that fear of disclosure. It seems like it would be very easy for them to be able to get ahead of things. But this 85% seems to be where the opportunity is, right? In terms of treatment. And I'm wondering, how are you all thinking in approaching the challenge of the fundamental issue that lies within them, which is this fear of being diagnosed in the first place, right? Because if we have the predictive side of it, even before they feel symptoms, right? And this is someone who is already going to be more likely to, non-disclose their symptoms because they have this internal fear. Are you all thinking about ways that you can help address that to be able to have people take more advantage of these predictive technologies that can then actually, hopefully, one day prevent the actual manifestation of these symptoms, but at least in the meantime, get ahead and start getting treatment?
Yeah. And it's what I find really interesting is, I might be on the cusp of like a millennial kind of status in terms of generational. But, the childbearing age folks these days are Gen Z, and they've never been more confident about and comfortable with technology and AI. And so there's some really interesting studies showing that they get really excited about AI in terms of allowing them to be to access therapy and do it in a way where there's less stigma. So they feel more comfortable disclosing things. They feel like it's a safe space where they don't necessarily have any negative ramifications for disclosing something. And that's what I find most interesting is I think healthcare in general is going to move really slowly towards AI and take its time. But the particular population we want to help most is actually already ready for AI baked into things. And then in general, when you look at and you poll the US population, 61% say that they actually think what they want from AI in healthcare is prediction. So that's where they're most comfortable with it today. And, I think what you said is absolutely right. I think we're going to bump up against a lot of stigma in the mental health space. But we've built really strategically in terms of the people that are hopefully a perfect fit for this particular intervention. We also take advantage of a really trusted relationship, which is the OBGYN. So one thing that we find with these patients, they see this doctor 10 to 12 times during pregnancy. They're texting them at midnight. The doctors are encouraging that. And so what the OBGYN recommends is basically what the patient will do.
I guess that's a great thing overall. I guess what I'm hearing is that hopefully that number, that 85%, is on trend to go down just because of changes generationally in the culture, things of that sort. The younger generation, Gen Zers, are more open to this type of thing. So hopefully this number will come down on trend over time. But as it's coming down, here's Nurtur now to actually provide that demand for technological predictive solutions in regards to mental health and other types of issues.
Yeah, and I can't even tell you, when I talk to women from every different generation about what we're doing, Gen Z is the one, usually they're a little bit before having kids, and they're like, I am so worried about postpartum depression. They have an awareness of this that we haven't seen in past generations, and I'm really excited that they're looking for solutions.
So I guess, have you launched the product in the market? Or do you have beta users? Tell me a little bit now about how the solution is actually playing out in the market. So you had we talked a little bit about the current state of things leading up to your solution.
Yeah.
You have a wonderful perspective, I think a wonderful product that is addressing a lot of the key factors that are contributing to the issue. And so now that it's actually here, tell us a little bit about what you're learning now.
Yeah, so we are actively onboarding patients at our pilot clinic in the Northeast and the Boston area. So that's been really exciting. We just onboarded 3 of them this week and have a lot more to go. So really excited about that, just to kind of illustrate the pilot being fully live and the technology is ready to go. So we're predicting and deploying a self-guided therapy that has preventative effects. But from there, we're also recruiting actively. We have a ton of grants that are at play as well. So really excited to share. We've been talking with a huge perinatal research consortium who are interested in joining us for a grant that we're doing right now. So up to 30,000 births every single year for 3 years that we'll also be doing clinical trials on as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Are you able to share any feedback you received so far about the product? Or matter of fact, let's take a step back actually, because we talked a little bit at a high level about what the product is. It's predictive, right?
Yeah.
It's a predictive assessment essentially. Can you walk us through the experience, kind of a first person POV, if I'm a mother, a pregnant mother who has now been introduced to the Nurtur product through my OB?
Yeah, so this is super exciting because prediction's just one element, right? If you can predict, then what, so what? And so we quickly realized that we needed to pair this with something. Initially, we thought we would get patients with their behavioral healthcare team earlier to try to mitigate the waitlist issue that we were finding because of the shortage of behavioral health clinicians. But we realized that there just was simply not enough behavioral health clinicians. We were still going to leave many women out in the cold. So we determined that AI was perfectly positioned to kind of mitigate this problem. There's a beautiful interpersonal therapy protocol that's clinically validated to prevent postpartum depression. And so we're deploying that in a self-guided form where women can access this 10-minute sessions, very scalable to do this online. And most importantly, it gives us the excuse to basically follow patients throughout their pregnancy journey and continue screening them every 2 weeks. Since we've identified their high risk with our machine learning algorithm, we're now taking a preventative play. But then again, we continue that monitoring and make sure that the second they meet the criteria for postpartum depression, we can then support them with treatment through a collaborative care model, which is a really scalable way to support your mental health with a social worker.
Tell us a little bit more about the collaborative care model, if you don't mind, or if it's okay for you to share.
Yeah, so collaborative care model is a really great way for basically your OBGYN to help coordinate care and to have more insight into the care that you're receiving for your mental health than ever before. So essentially, we work with him or her and use our social worker and our psychiatrists who are specialized in perinatal mental health to work with the patient throughout their entire mental health journey. And all of this basically supports with weekly reports back to the OBGYN and kind of keeps that beautiful collaboration. That's kind of the crux of this model.
Absolutely. And then so that means no more wait times, which reduces the fatality risk associated with those wait times, which is fantastic. That saves lives. With the OBGYN who only has 7 to 15 minutes, being able to directly refer you to, mental health services, essentially, to receive care on a weekly and ongoing basis. If I'm understanding correctly, that's transformative for these patients.
It's a very high-touch, outreach-based sort of behavioral healthcare plans that have been put together, and it's a really compelling. So not only is the OBGYN excited about this and bought into this and able to help direct your mental health with experts in the space, but payers or the health insurance companies also love this because, again, it's very scalable. So you're receiving therapy quickly. It's sort of built on the crux that we should be iterating your mental health care plan quickly. And after 3 months, if something's not working, move to a new type of therapy. So basically everybody wins and it's a great value-based care plan.
Outstanding. I love that solution. Yeah, because it's tackling a lot of the things we discussed earlier head on, right? Like a lot of these key factors that you've identified, these are direct solutions that, should have significant impact to the patient.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we're really excited about what we can do for OBGYNs and the patient and kind of like coordinating their care, making an impact to their lives. But there's a bunch of other groups that are definitely excited to tackle this problem. So employers actually bear a huge brunt of the cost of untreated postpartum depression. So they see a lot of absenteeism and turnover, costs associated with women just unable to integrate back into the workforce. And then often women actually turn over. So unfortunately, many women opt out of the workforce because it's just such a struggle with their mental health challenges and juggling a new baby.
Totally understand that. Yeah, and I know we've seen, all of us have seen our fair share of that, definitely in our careers. Okay, great. So you're launched, you're doing well. You have pilots, you're securing grants. This is fantastic. So you're well on your way to scaling this solution and impacting countless number of lives, moving forward into the future. When it comes to, I guess, the grand vision, I see this, and if I'm hearing correctly, this is the key critical problem that you've identified now, but it appears you're building a foundation for a larger, I guess, platform of care moving forward. Correct me if I'm wrong, but at least that's what I'm seeing kind of shaping up. And so I would love to know what's your, I guess, grand vision for Nurtur, at its peak, as you see it in your mind, when you sit up at night and you think about what Nurtur can be and who it can serve. Can you tell me a little bit about that from your perspective?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much like blue ocean, green grass. We get really excited about it. And when you look at the way that we've designed this company, maybe it's because we're some nerds from MIT, but we really did a tech first AI enabled approach. And so we think that the most scalable way to address this problem that's going to work for women that live in rural areas and can't access care, women that can't leave the house with a new baby, is really going to be technology and not necessarily just telehealth, because again, there aren't enough clinicians to be on the other side of that camera.
Right.
But how are we using AI to make educational and interpersonal therapy more of a therapeutic experience? So we're really going hard at postpartum depression, 1 in 5 pregnancies, but perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, like I mentioned earlier, we have postpartum anxiety impacting even more women. Everything from postpartum OCD. Postpartum psychosis is what keeps me up at night. They have the highest rates of suicide and unfortunately infanticide at up to 5 to 10%. And so there's a lot of opportunities to save lives in that space as well. But all of this, we're very excited to be the forefront in terms of prediction and prevention in these unique spaces that no one else is focused on, in addition to paternal health, which we talked about earlier. So just very excited about all of the possibility along sort of his and her mental health continuum. But also, I touched on earlier, major depressive disorder isn't quite as easy to predict yet. But we think that when we become experts in predicting in all of these different spaces around the unique kinds of mental health associated with pregnancy and beyond, we're ready to tackle that as well, because major depressive disorder is actually comorbid in 30 to 50% of all health challenges, the biggest health disorders. And so we would like to be the ones that are also taking and managing the mental health associated with other, oncology, other specialties as well.
It makes me extremely happy, and I feel extremely privileged to be able to have a relationship with you and know you and participate along your journey and watch you build this vision. So
yeah, you've been so accelerative. Like, we're just so grateful for you and SVB. Like, you're constantly inviting me to the right places, putting me in the right rooms. So I can't say enough good things about you. I'm always telling people, I'm like, are you working with SVB? You should be. So
I appreciate that. Yeah. What's the things that drive you internally to go down this path and to really dedicate years of your life to serving this cause?
Yeah, and it's kind of nice that we've built a little more rapport now. But yeah, so growing up, I was an older sister to a younger brother. And at the age of 5, he was diagnosed with clinical depression. As you can imagine, that was really tough for him, for the family unit, but it really molded me. And so I became his champion. I was, the one that could sort of help him access the world and be his best self. And so that truly just has never left me. And so when I look back on my past career and some of the ways I've felt called forward to really show up for different groups, it definitely continues. And when I saw postpartum depression and I saw that we were just losing and missing so many women, I knew that this was the area that would bring forth like best version of myself. We could really make a difference with technology and all the skills that we already had as like the dream team to tackle this. And I get really excited. It makes all the late nights, I was up till 2 a.m. last night working, it makes it all worth it. And I know that we're going to make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I love that. And I mean, if you'd like, there may be women who are going through pregnancies currently, or women who will be going through pregnancies in the near future, who may be watching, this conversation and listening closely to your every word. And so if there's anything that you would like to say to them directly, as they're either going through pregnancy or approaching motherhood, in the pre-planning stages, is there anything you would like to say to these women directly?
I think I would just say you're not alone. Like at the end of the day, the sisterhood of women is there for you. Your significant other is there for you more than you think. And so really thinking through in advance, like who is my network? And you might feel very isolated at this time, but at the end of the day, people are so excited to support you and help you in this journey. But they may not know how. So sometimes it's really important to just think about this during pregnancy, think about this in advance. Who would I reach out to for help? What would I ask of them? And just, visualize having that conversation, because everyone is willing to help. It takes a village, and everyone wants to be there for them.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, Kristen, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I learned a ton. I'm extremely excited for what you're building at Nurtur, and really looking forward to seeing you bring your vision into reality.
Thank you so much, AJ. It means a lot. Thanks for having us here today.
Excellent.